Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen, ladies and anybody out there. Hey, we're back tonight on the Erudition Network to do the show tonight. A little bit of a setup. I got my tissue back in case my nose runs. But we're here tonight. We've been off for it's been about 2 weeks, maybe 3. Just taking care of some things that needed to be taken care of. And doing what we needed to do, but I'm happy tonight that I'm actually back on and live. One of the things that we try to do on this show is to go over history. If you're new to this program, new to the Erudition Network, then we are on typically every Thursday to teach Black history to those who are willing to learn and to be interactive in our approach to Black history. So this is a labor of love that we do on Thursdays. But as I said, we haven't been on for a little bit. Just trying to adjust some things. I'm trying to adjust my screen right here. So I'm just happy to be back. I'm going to send out a little thing because I sent out an advertisement today to get people, because we haven't been on. And so I wanted to make sure folks knew that we would be on tonight so that they could be interactive. The whole purpose of this program is to be interactive. Hey, Sean Anthony, how you doing? I'm glad that you're here. That is my son joining in for the conversation. Please share on your Facebook page. Encourage folks to join us. The whole purpose of the interactive is just that, to be interactive and to try to get people's questions and thoughts and differing opinions in and see how they respond to it and what they know about history that they could share. It's never been about just me getting on to bloviate or talk for an hour. And I have always tried to make this program as interactive as possible, answer questions as needed, share what I can. And so I want you to do the same. I want you to go out and even if you watch the recording of this, I want you to go out and share all of the information that you can about this show and get more people to watch, get more people to be interactive. All right. So as I said, I'm going to put something out here, and see if we can rile up and get some people from on YouTube and Facebook to participate and get on here to interact with us tonight. Tonight's episode, I want to talk about Black people. Like, that's a surprise, but I want to talk about how we, throughout the history of the world, have basically been defenders. How we have been pulled into major battles, and how we have been essential in winning wars and getting people, especially in this country, without our help, a lot of the things that happened throughout history. And it's not saying this to be braggadocious or to make up history. It is a fact. We would not be we wouldn't be where we are right now. And so I wanted to speak to this tonight because it's so important. I'm sending out that announcement. But it's so important for us to be able to do that, because here's what I believe. I believe that we don't know enough. We don't know enough about what we've done to speak to it with some sort of pride and what we were able to accomplish. So I think, we should talk about that tonight. And I wanted to get as many people as I could to get on to be interactive about it and to talk about it. Because, as I said, I think it's a very important subject and a very important topic. All right. So I just sent out that notification. We'll see if anybody joins us or comes in. If they don't, that's fine. You can always re-engage on the replay, as we call it. And you can always leave questions, and I promise you they will be answered on any of our replays. YouTube, or even if you're on Facebook, drop a question, and I promise you, I will get back to you. So let's get into this thing here. I think the best way to start this. Hey, what's up, bro? That's my brother. That's my wife, my sister's husband, my brother. I'm happy to see you. Good afternoon, Matthew. Good to see you. Glad you're here and participating in the conversation. All right, let's get to this. Whether people show up or not, let's get to this, because we haven't been on for a couple of weeks. Let me tell you, one of the things that I have found to be profound in my life is because I am a veteran, a military veteran. And what I have found to be very important is that African Americans have typically served in the military for this country. And every war that you can think of, in every conflict for this country that you can think of, African Americans have participated in. We have been there and helped to win a lot of these conflicts and these wars. When you go back and you look at even before the founding of this country, you will find that we have been over here, whether we participated with the Spanish or whether we participated with the French. There has been an African-American presence always in this country that has helped to ensure that wars were won. Now, the rub is that many of us who have served this nation they did it without being thanked and without being appreciated, and also without having proper recognition given to them. However, it does not change the fact of the valor, the honor, and what they deserve, because what these people were able to do was to help win wars. When you look and you think about the Tuskegee Airmen, when you look and you think about the wars, the Revolutionary War, right? And we consider that the first, let's say, casualty of the Revolutionary War was Crispus Attucks, who was an indigenous. He was a mixed man of indigenous and black of nationality. The thing about Crispus Attucks is that the reason that he was killed, as in the Boston Massacre, is that he stood up with other patriots who were angry with the way that the British were treating the American colonists over here. Now, what is left out of Attucks's story most often is the fact that the reason that the British soldiers shot Attucks was because Attucks had what he perceived to be a club in his hand. And he was probably one of the first documented American cases of being killed simply because he was a threatening black man. Not me making that up. This is what was testified to in the trial of the British soldiers. They said that he was a fairly large, strong, scary black man that was approaching them. And a lot of people were throwing ice and snow. And so they killed Attucks. They shot him through the heart. It is also important to note at this time that the British wanted, during the Revolutionary War, they actually encouraged slaves to escape and fight on the side of the British. And some blacks actually did go fight on the side of the British because the British told them that they would be free. And they promised freedom to runaway slaves. It was Lord Dunmore who promised freedom to runaway slaves and told them that if they fought on the side of the British, they could be affirmed that they and their progeny, because remember, chattel slavery was also about not only you being a slave, but it was also about anything that came out of the woman was a slave also. It was owned by the master. That was chattel slavery. And so when we look at the Revolutionary War, you have to consider that these black men fought on the side of the colonies, even though it wasn't guaranteed that they would be free. In fact, George Washington, when first approached with the idea of black men serving in the Continental military, he initially rejected it. He rejected it. He did not want black men having guns. He had actually had a ban on the Continental Army that stated, no, this would not happen. But upon Lord Dunmore's proclamation from the Brits to say that this is what we would do, Washington repealed that order. And upon doing that, thousands of African-American slaves became soldiers and fought for revolution. They were promised that they would be able to be free and that their progeny, their children, would be free. And they defended, and I would dare say, boosted the numbers of the Continental Army. Some estimates say by 60,000, when the British had about 15,000 blacks that fought for them, that escaped and fought for them. And so when we consider the African as the defender of the faith, the defender of liberty, the patriot that they were, and they went out and they fought, knowing that what they were fighting for may not be given to them. People, actual soldiers, took slaves to battle with them. Washington was one. He took his slave to the battle with him. And that's just the Revolutionary War. And it's obvious that we won that war. When war came again in the War of 1812, just as many black men went to war. And I don't want to dissuade the idea of black women, because it should also be stated that we're talking about an age of the Napoleonic age, so to speak. And so it wasn't uncommon for people to go to war and take folks with them to do things for them, right? To take their slaves with them. And that could also mean their female slaves. And so it wasn't uncommon for these people to go to war with whites and support them by uniforms, knitting, help with medical needs, cooks. They fed the generals, they fed the officers, they fed the troops. Scouting, because they knew the areas. All of these things are documented in our history, but never really told to us as black people as the defender of the faith, the defender of liberty. You know, I told a story once here on Erudition about a woman who is considered to be black because her father was of mixed race, who saved George Washington, Francis, who saved George Washington from poisoning by the British. Phyllis Wheatley, who wrote poems talking about the sanctity and the beauty and the honor of democracy and freedom, and praised George Washington. A poet who we still read today. A black woman. When we tell folks that, when folks tell you to go back to your country in this nation, and we hear that a lot too often, more often than I care to hear it at all. And we say that what you should say to them is, this is my country just as much as it is yours. In some ways more. Because as we have stated before, the African was here before the colonists, the European colonists. The African was making trips over here well before that. We know from the dialogue, we know from the evidence, we know from the archaeological evidence. They came over here, but they didn't come to conquer. They didn't come to covet. And if we don't efface that part of the history, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're not teaching history in its honesty. When we get to thinking about wars, the ability of the African to, one, it amazes me, and I have done it. I will tell you that my military service was not always sweet. And I would be lying to you if I were to tell you that I did not experience any racism, both within and without, in my time serving. That would be a lie. Because the facts are that every African American in this country, whether they admit it or not, has dealt with some form of racism. But in the military, it's different. Because despite the racism, You have to find some way to go forth and do your job. You have to find some way to go forth and make a difference. That's not always easy. And in older times, it was even harder. The Navy traditionally had been more accepting of Black people because all Navy folks really cared about in the days of the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, they really cared that you could do the job. It was a dirty job to be on those ships. And it was most times seen as eventual death because you were fighting the elements, fighting the ship, and fighting those who were on the ship with you. And that is difficult. But yet, I am always amazed with the Black patriots who went out and stood for America in spite of. When I look at Salem Poor, when I look at these men who fought for America at a time where it's you know, it just blows my mind. Several months ago, I think around the 4th of July, and I'm going to try to pull that picture up, I had posted a picture of the amount of Black men who served during the Revolutionary War. The Black men who we don't talk about. The war heroes who were so important to the freeing of this country from British rule. And yet, as we look at it, many people, far too many, tell us, go back to your country. They will teach us all day about George Washington. They will teach us all day about Benjamin Franklin. They will talk to us about Andrew Jackson. They will talk to us about all of these men from history, but they do not talk to us about our own patriots because it is not important. And I didn't think I would spend this much time talking about the Revolutionary War, but I find it funny that when my kids, and I would dare say some of you all's kids, go to school, that they spend so much time talking about these people. And it bothers me. It bothers me. You know, I as I was pulling this up, I ran across one of my notes about Crispus Attucks that I spoke about earlier. And some of the newspapers, they said that Crispus Attucks was a mulatto fellow, about 27 years of age. He was 6 feet tall, 2 inches, short curled hair, and that the thing about him was that when the Brits shot him, it was one of the few times that white men, our founding fathers, got behind a Black man. On the 5th of March in 1776, Washington said, remember, it's the 5th of March, and avenge the death of our brother. Let us not forget Crispus Attucks. It's amazing for a man who was afraid to put guns in the hands of Black people. But he would use Crispus Attucks as a rallying cry. we need to know our history. And I am always saying that, you know, the courage of Salem Poor and Peter Salem, during the Battle of Bunker Hill, the bravery of William Carney. William Carney kept the flag from falling during the Battle of Fort Wagner for the 54th Massachusetts. The Harlem Hellfighters in World War I, who stood in front of German odds and stayed and were one of the most honored military outfits, platoons in the entire war. They had a huge parade that marched down the streets of New York. Thousands showed up to cheer them on their return, black, white, and others. But if you look at all of these wars, if you look at all of these conflicts, you will also note that at the beginning of each one, there was fear. Let's talk about that. You guys are quiet tonight. Please feel free to ask questions. It's not just about me. This is an interactive. If you have a question, even if it's not on topic, ask the question. This is for, I am a historian and I like to talk about history. Do not feel that you cannot ask a question. Drop it in the chat. If you watch the replay of this, drop a question in the chat. You help us to decide a lot of times what we're going to talk about because it lets me know what people don't know. And I know the history is hard, but it is essential. The time that I have spent not being online with you all is to looking at better ways to teach this thing, to teach this history. Eddie said, for us, a supposed melting pot that goes back to your country term really angers me. Some don't see it as a melting pot. Some don't see it as a melting pot. When we talked about Memorial Day and a couple of months ago and how Memorial Day, Black folks as defenders, as keepers of the belief of liberty, you can trace that back, as I said, before the founding of the country. But it was Black people, Black slaves, that designed and came up with the idea of Memorial Day. You know, that is so important. And when we talked about that, how many people were lost, Union and Confederate, fighting for the imprisonment of Black history, Black people. And a lot of people assigned the idea of Decoration Day, as it was called before, Memorial Day, to whites and said, oh, they wanted to honor the soldiers. But that's not the case. The fact of the matter is the Washington Race Club and Charleston, South Carolina is where it originated. And it is noted that a historian had to pull this out because I dare say this was always known. Black people, realizing that the Washington Race Course had been a prison camp for Union soldiers, and many had died there and been buried in makeshift graves. Black people went and dug up these men, approximately of about 270 Union soldiers. They dug them up and they replanted them and they made a cemetery. And they did their best to name as many as they could by what they saw. And then they had a ceremony to honor them. where they marched around with their kids, their freed kids. They marched around with the members of the 54th Massachusetts that you saw in the movie Glory were there. Men who had seen an onslaught that killed more than half of their platoon. And they marched around to honor these Union soldiers, these white soldiers, and to remember them, to give them a memorial. When I tell you that Black people are the keepers of the faith, the people who believe in liberty, justice, traditionally, that has been what we have done. And I would dare say many of us still do. When the Civil War was going on, and even before, many Blacks had the ability to flee to Canada. Instead, they chose to fight. They chose to stay here and fight for a country that had never proven to them that it supported them. When we get to the Civil War, we have to remember that a lot of the free Blacks who were in the North, because we spend so much time talking about the freed Blacks, the free Blacks that were actually in the North, who had been the descendants of Blacks who had, some of them who had fought during the Revolutionary War, and they were free by law because their parents had been freed because of fighting in the Civil War. In the Revolutionary War. And unfortunately, when it came time before the Civil War, where you saw the Fugitive Slave Act, many of those people, like Solomon, different people, they were grabbed and taken back into slavery, despite the fact of what was told and what was promised to them. So when the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 went into effect, a lot of them, again, and many did, could have ran to Canada. But they stuck around. They stayed. And when the time came for the possibility to be able to fight for this country, they again, many of them whose family had been snatched, they signed up and they went to go fight for this country. They believed in the promise of liberty. They believed in the possibility of, as what they called it, the time of Jubilee, freedom for all. It's important for us to understand this because that's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. To stay and fight in a country and for a country who really doesn't support you. I shared with you all a few months ago that even in the North, preachers were preaching sermons telling freed Blacks that if you want, before the Civil War, if you want this country to not go into civil war, turn yourself back into slavery. We lie to ourselves with the idea that everything was free, and it was not. It was not. Let's come forward. Let's come forward. And again, I'm going to beseech you to ask questions. If you have a conflicting view, if you have a different opinion, bring it. Let's talk about it. Leave the questions in the chats, whether you watch us on YouTube or you watch us on Facebook. I want your interaction, and I want you to learn something. That's the most important thing for me. But let's move a little forward, right? Let's think about some things a little bit differently here. If I were to ask you, right, to name me a war, a conflict in this country, I don't care what it is, the Civil War, the Indian Wars, the Mexican-American Wars, the wars in the Philippines, the World War I, World War II. Name me one war that Black people entered into that they didn't make a significant contribution, that their very presence and activity in that war, the numbers. I can go through the wars that we really know. We know in World War I that was obviously an issue, that we boosted numbers, that we came in and helped. You know, the educator and the philosopher and writer W.B. Du Bois, during a time during World War I where Black men were being lynched all over the country, him and other civil rights workers still stood up and said, country first, rights later. That was the patriotism. That was the patriotism. And then they came home after World War I. And we had 1919, Red Summer. And we had Black men being lynched all over the nation after defending freedom abroad, after fighting intolerance, just to come back to intolerance. Now, I'm going to segue a little bit here because the media today tells us this story about Jewish people and the anger between Jewish people and Blacks. They perpetuate this idea that we don't like each other. And I find it really funny when people say that because it's so ignorant to history. If not for the treatment, I'm gonna say this on here tonight, and maybe I'll go into this further next week. If not for the treatment of Blacks in the South, and because we always leave this out, in parts of the North in America, America may have had a better place to stand in arguing the treatment of the Jews by the Nazis. But the genocide of the Jews was excused by the Nazis because of the genocide that was being done over here to Blacks. Sean Anthony. Even when Black people were not going to win, they still fought in every war this country faced, even though they were still hated by the individuals that they were protecting. That's the rub, as Shakespeare says. That's the rub. Because we still fought in spite of. But getting back to the subject about the Jewish people, because the Kanyes and all of the different things that have been said out here, this misrepresentation of the nature and the connectivity of the Jewish people and especially African Americans. When Roosevelt's State Department went to the Nazis in the 30s and said, hey, listen, we can't really support what you're doing. This is horrible, what we're seeing that you're doing to the Jews. Two things happened. Before the genocide, the Nazis were trying to get rid of the Jews, get out of the country. They were supporting the idea of the Jews leaving. And America closed its borders and said no, because there was anti-Jewish sentiment over here also. In a meeting with many countries, country after country stood up saying that they would not accept the Jewish people. This is before Hitler started to kill them. Even though evidence, the night of broken glass, everything had already happened. And many groups, NAACP is one, went to the president, went to the State Department, went to the government and said, we got to do something. He's going to kill them. But every time they went over, what was said was Mississippi. It's a historical fact. The Nazis, Goebbels, every time an American official spoke about saving Jewish people's lives and the treatment that the Jews were facing, one simple name was said: Mississippi. When the Nazi regime failed at the end of World War II, and the Nazis were put on trial at Nuremberg, many of them, check your historical records, sat on the stand and said, we did exactly what you did. We just did it more. The genocides on both sides are horrible. I watched a woman the other day after Dave Chappelle appeared on Saturday Night Live say, well, you can't make a comparison. And I said, that's crazy, because historically there is a comparison. The violators and murderers made that comparison. Hitler made that comparison. When Jesse Owens ran at the Olympics, Hitler told his private friends that soon the Olympics will only be in Germany. This is how he thought about world conquest. And primitive people like Jesse Owens would not be allowed to participate. There were blacks in Germany. There were German blacks that were ostracized, stripped of rights. We were all seen as inferior. And black people, despite the treatment that they have seen after World War I, despite the events of 1919, despite the lynchings and the killings in the 20s, they still signed up. They still went to go be drafted and still chose. That's what we need to look at too. Not drafted, chose. When America wanted to be isolationist until after the Japanese attacked, Black people, black people, black men, black women volunteered their time, effort, and commitment to defend this country that didn't love them. They signed up, even in the beginning when they only had them as cooks, as support. They signed up to go give their lives just as their forefathers had done in World War I. They wanted to prove themselves worthy of being called men. And they went to go fight. And I can tell you for a fact, many of them earned some of the highest honors in the military. Not just Dory Miller. So many earned high honors, and they were denied it by the military. We have people who it took years for them to be given their credit and their accolades. Lost to time are the names of Benjamin O. Davis Sr. or Benjamin O. Davis Jr. Lost to time are people like Joseph C. Jenkins. For the Navy, the Golden 13. Great book. Go get the Golden 13. These men who were placed as officers and led. The Tuskegee Airmen who knew that if they crashed, they were dead. Not only by the crash, but even if they survived, that the Germans would kill them by decree. But yet we fought. We defended. Someone asked me once, years ago, when I was in the Navy, they asked me, they said, "Why did you enlist?" And I told them, I said, well, part of it was for school. So it was my initial thought when I first came in, just to be honest with you. I said, but there's also a part of me that is very patriotic. There's a part of me that loves history. There's a part of me, like Dr. King says, that holds America accountable to her promise. America, upon its design, made a promise. And thousands of Black people, multiple thousands of Black people, served in the military, holding to that promise. They did their duty every day, holding to that promise. There are men and women right now serving in our armed forces who hold America to that promise, despite being called out of their names when they're not in uniform, despite being denied service sometimes even when they are in their uniform. I, at one point, held a position as the force protection assistant for the Navy at the Navy Command out here in Colorado. And I remember going to the first brief, and talking about terrorist actions. And what surprised me was that they weren't talking about Arabs and Muslims and all these things that were being said back in those days. They talked about places in Colorado you could not go. They talked about a woman who had spit on an African-American sailor who was actually doing a community relations job. as she walked up and spit on his uniform. We have had people in this country, minorities who have been attacked, shot, hurt in uniform. I am always honored when it happened to me yesterday. A young man, he broke. I was at Walmart and he made his way around a bunch of people. I had my Navy hat on and he just wanted to come up and shake my hand and simply say, "Thank you for your service, sir." And every time I meet someone like that, black, white, whatever, I try to be very, very accommodating. And I try to talk to them and speak to them and try to communicate with them about the importance of what my service meant to me. It's two reasons for that. Because as a defender, and I take that seriously, as a defender, every black person who puts on that uniform, you're a defender. You know it may cost you your life, and you're willing to die for a promise. I specify the idea of a promise because a promise is something that we say we're going to do, even when there's no evidence to the kind. And we hold people to their promise. We hold them to it. We want to believe that when everything goes wild, they're going to do what they said. Revolutionary War, all the way to the last Gulf Wars, we're still holding out for that promise. There are those who keep the promise. And that makes us go a little bit longer. That makes us defend a little bit more. When we see people honor African American service, when we hear them and they say, "This is the toughest people that I've ever had. This unit is outstanding." When we see the accolades that are now, years and decades later, given to the Tuskegee Airmen, it's important to look at those things and to give understand why people could go a little bit longer. There's also a pride in that. When I went into the Navy, my grandfather, when I initially came back from boot camp, my grandfather took me to the side. He put his hand on my shoulder and he told me how proud he was of me and what I had chosen to do, because he knew it wasn't easy. When I talked to my dad and he talked about his uncles who all served, who all went to World War II, who all went to go serve. When I look at my little brother Emmanuel and I see that service is in us. That promise, that belief to do better, to do something for this country that cannot be denied. Black people have been the keepers. I'm not saying that whites have not sacrificed, but whites they sacrificed with a thing, knowing that they came home, their sacrifice would be honored. Black people, it was proven that it wasn't honored. They came back fighting people who were angry simply because they were in uniform. And evidence in cases of them ripping off people's uniform, blinding them, killing them in their uniforms. When you know this history and you know what went on and you understand how Joseph Goebbels, and if you don't know who Goebbels was the head of the Nazi propaganda. He was Hitler's man for disseminating information. And simply remember that when they came to say, why are you doing this to the Jews? All he had to say was Mississippi. He could have went further. He could have said Jim Crow, but he understood, the world understood why the black man was fighting, what he was fighting against in America. He understood the sterilization laws. He understood the abortion laws. Yes, where they were going in and taking babies, sterilizing men and women. He understood it. And he threw it right back at him. How can you say it's evil if you're doing the same thing? He understood the idea of eugenics, the idea of the ethnocentric mind thinking that you are superior. He understood all of those things that his compatriots here in America were doing and said, not so. We can do whatever we want to do because you're doing worse. You're doing worse. So imagine the mind-boggling idea of the German, of the Nazi, when black men show up fighting. And they kept getting on their radios and their programs telling the black man, why are you fighting? They don't even want you. That was thrown in their face. I close this episode with the last thing I want to talk about is the idea of learning history. I had the honor this week of writing a foreword to what I really know is going to be a great book that I see going to the bestsellers list because it was really a great book on Black people and their history, biblical history. And what I want to say to you all tonight, if you watch this as a replay, is that we got to invest in our history. I took a couple of weeks off because I wanted to think about better ways to teach this history, to provide you the information that you need to grow your knowledge. And I got a couple of ideas. But one of my things is that in order for us to grow this network, because Erudition is a network, we need support. We need support. And I'm going to tell you that your support is appreciated. I just turned on our ticker here at the bottom. This has been on all night doing the episode. And I'm asking you to do a little to help with it so that we can do the thing we need to do. Show we have on the currently. Not a lot, doesn't be a lot, but help us so that we can grow and meet the needs of the people who want to learn out here. Help us grow our YouTube channel. We should not be under 100 people. Help us get to that next level of 100 and then go further. If you're gaining something from the program, Drop us a line. Tina does Adroit Living. I do the Interact right now. We have other shows. Drop us a line. Tell us what you've learned. Tell us how we can do better. Tell us what we can provide for you to do better. And we'll do that. But until next time, I don't want to be on here over an hour anymore. Until next time, I want you to consider those points. I want you to share this episode. And God willing, I will see you all next Thursday for another edition of the interactive program. Please share this video. Until then, God bless you. When I look at our history, I realize that our history is not negotiable. It's not defined by slavery. It is a profound history, and we need to teach it in honesty.